But so I know there was a question in the back.
I think you kind of referred to it a little bit when you said a different systems. I know there are some that have both insulin and glucagon.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
How does that compare or relate to?
So this is an insulin-only system, and everything that is necessary to commercialize this already exists, right? So we already have pumps, we already have sensors, and we already have it's using the insulin that's already approved, right? And phones already exist. But JDRF is looking at next generations. So we're looking at how we can get insulin on board faster. We're looking at smaller sensors. We're also looking at, can we add a brake and an accelerator? Can we add glucagon to bring you up and insulin to push you down? And the great news is, yes, the data coming back from those trials is very impressive. Work being done here in Boston by Ed Damiano, who's part of the consortium, and by Ken Ward out in Oregon. Really, really powerful stuff. The problem is, right this very moment, the gating components of that work is that there's no such thing as stable soluble glucagon, right? So how many of us know about freeze-dried glucagon and the stupid little orange kit? That when somebody's unconscious on the floor, you're having to like, wow, you know, how do I make this work, right? So it's crazy nuts that we have to go through that. So JDRF is actually funding work with 2 companies and 1 researcher to drive the commercial development of stable soluble glucagon that can be used in a dual hormone system. But the other problem is because stable soluble glucagon doesn't exist, there's no pump that can deliver 2 hormones. And most people, particularly adolescents, teenagers, do not want to wear 2 pumps, right? So JDRF has partnered with industry to create the first commercially available dual-chambered pump. Right? Remember I was telling you that there's these amazing people that are managing this incredibly complex portfolio with amazing million pieces that interlock to drive forward against a master plan? This is what I mean. This is all starting to make sense? Did that answer that question for you?
Yes.
So absolutely something that we're focused on, absolutely something we want to see happen. It's just further out. This system that I have on, that I have been using, and I will let people play with it, it's actually running in demo mode. So if it was April Fool's Day, I was seriously thinking about playing a trick on you all. But it's in demo mode, you can't hurt me, you can do whatever you want to do with this system. But if you push stop, it does turn the thing off. This next step that we want to do with this insulin-only system is to go to a pivotal trial, so basically a phase 2-3 trial, and put it on several hundred people for 6 months, right? That's going to be great. That'll give us 2 A1Cs. This is a cell phone. Cell phones link up into the web, and that means we can suck all that data up about you and know how much time you spent in target range, not in target range, how many lows we avoided, how many highs we avoided, right? Powerful, powerful stuff. Another really amazing thing about cell technology is that means that moms and dads at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, if they want to know where their kids are, and you know what I mean when I say where, not where they are, but where they are, and you can literally pull up that exact same screen and look at it on your iPhone, your iPad, your laptop, any web-enabled device. You could go there and see it. It could send you an alert if something was going wrong. Right? This is really powerful technology that really starts to drive new things. Anyway, we want to do that next trial, $10 million. So if you wonder why JDRF is always, I mean, I always make this point, and I even say this with my colleague Peter, who's really all on the research side. Every single person at JDRF is a fundraiser. Because if we don't raise the money, none of what we're seeing here happens. You know, the wonderful thing about Carol Lurie is, back in 1970, when people were saying, what do we need to do? And a couple of medical researchers said, well, if we just had some money, we could probably work on this. And she said, is that all it is? I can raise money, right? And that's what became JDRF. We are about raising money. The next big trial for what we're talking about here is $10 million to take us the next big step forward. So if you ever wonder why we're doing the next gala or the next walk or all those times we talk to you about what you can do, is because that's what this drives forward. Any questions? Lots. We're never going to get to the other side.
All right. I thought I heard you say that when you started your dinner the first evening, you were wearing the artificial pancreas, you bolus 1.9 units. So how much intervention did you have to do on your own? Did you start every meal with a bolus and let the artificial pancreas take it from there, or did it?
So different systems are using, so the question is how much did I think what you're basically saying is how much did I have to be involved in making decisions? And my best analogy for this one is autopilot on a jet. So flying here to Boston from Charlotte, North Carolina, once the plane was in the air, autopilot pretty much took care of taking the plane where it was supposed to be. But to take off and land, the pilot gets behind the yoke and helps to make the plane take off and land. So the pilot becomes part of the system to really get optimal performance from it, right? Same here. So to the extent that I want to see the best performance from the system, I'm intended to still help give instructions to the system. Hey, I'm about to exercise, but all it literally is, and you can see it on the phone, exercise. I'm just telling, it's a little button, you just touch it and it says, I'm exercising. Okay, I'm done exercising, you touch it and you turn it off. So it's a very simple interface, a very simple amount of information. There are ones, and this one actually has a system on it where you can get very detailed on the bolus and enter cards and do all that if you want to. There are other ones that basically say, low carb, medium carb, high carb meal, and the system learns what you think that is, so it doesn't even matter realistically what it is slow, because what a 19-year-old in college thinks is a low carb meal is pretty different from that. So minimal, but still involved. We're still part of the loop. From the FDA regulatory safety perspective, they feel better about us being in that loop. The engineers will tell you, don't put people in the loop because they mess things up. So, but we're definitely in the loop. We're still meant to be involved in being able to take control of something that isn't working the way you think it's supposed to. Question?
Is any of the algorithm that delivery of insulin personal to you?
That's a really good question. So the answer is yes.
Yes.
So is the software personalized? The system has a really powerful heuristics that can be self-learning, that can actually adapt really to you. But those elements are not going to be turned on and used, because that means that you would have 2 million different artificial pancreas systems, one to another, and that's FDA's definition of a regulatory nightmare, right? I mean, so what it means is, in the same way that you can have a pump and you can say, this is what my correction factors are, these are what my ratios are, you can do all those sorts of things. And that helps to personalize it. What's powerful about this is, because it's watching you all the time and pulling up all that data on you, it gives you way better ways of knowing what your insulin to carb ratio is at 4 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and right before a swim meet or a math test, right? I mean, it's got a lot of information that it can crunch to give you better information to customize it so it can optimally perform, right? So that's my best way to kind of explain it, that works. One more, and then I'll go to the next slide.
I actually participated in Ed Technology
Cool.
Study last year, and I know
I should have asked that question.
this timeline is 2017.
Yep.
And I wanted to know what JDRF's timeline was, if it was as aggressive as of 2017, or I know you talked about pivotal studies, which is awesome, 6 months is where that thing would be.
Yeah, with that, I can't wait.
But I wanted to know how that compared to his timeline and kind of what we can expect.
So remember, so Ed is part of JDRF's consortium, and we're the ones who got him started and going where he is, so we're all part of the same thing, but within any group of people, we're going to all have different opinions about what's possible and what the timelines look like. So JDRF is really looking at this in terms of what we have in hand and we know we can drive. So the system, like the one that I was just showing you, that's all the technology components of it are already available, right, or close to full commercialization already. We can be much more confident about moving that into pivotal trials and understanding what the commercialization timeline looks like. So for instance, this system can pull back on insulin to prevent me from going low, and it can give me extra insulin to prevent me from going high. One of our corporate partners within the next 30 days is going to announce the commercialization of the first half of that, the predictive low glucose suspend. That's a giant first step into the commercialization of artificial pancreas technologies. The next step then is the pivotal trial that I was talking about, where Ed is trying to go, and we're all about trying to do, and where we've been funding our money, is to try to bring that glucagon on board. But remember, no commercially available insulin pump that can pump 2 forms of hormone, or 2 different hormones, and no stable soluble glucagon. So if anything delays either of the developments of those, 2017 is going to be hard to achieve, but it doesn't mean we don't want to achieve it, and we are certainly trying to drive the breakthroughs that can allow these sorts of things to happen. Time will tell whether we're able to get to that. I won't even try to do my personal crystal ball gazing. If anyone really would impress me on this, I would say, remember the old figure 8 balls where I'm old enough, I'm 54, where you could shake it and it would float up and it would say, answer hazy, try back later. I think that's what my answer would be to will we make it by 2017. I think that we're going to see the first steps into this technology commercialization reaching us very shortly here. You're going to see another step that starts to add insulin a couple of years beyond that, and then we're going to see more things beyond that. but I can't tell you exactly what year I think it's going to happen. We'll have to see. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but that's my sense. Love to see it happen. JDRF is trying to drive the enabling technologies that will allow it to happen. I'm no better at crystal ball gazing than anyone else. All right, so I'm going to jump forward. So again, I started macro and I've been drilling down in some very concrete things. We went from things that were a concept to things that work in human beings. So let's move artificial pancreas out of the way and talk about smart insulin, right? I figured we should definitely go to this one next, since that's one of the things that Boston will ultimately be known for one day, because Todd Zion at MIT was one of the people who helped to drive this forward. Has everybody heard of smart insulin before? Oh, yes, no, maybe. So, I mean, this is insulin that is bound up by a polymer, could give a shock to all the people with healthy pancreases in here, and nothing would happen, because that polymer would have bound up the insulin, and the insulin couldn't do anything. But for all of us like me, who was currently at 163 or whatever, as soon as my blood sugar started to go up too high, that polymer breaks down and releases the insulin, and the insulin is able to metabolize the glucose. So this is literally the idea of insulin that's there and turns on when you need it and turns off when you don't, thus the on-off switch, right? And because it stops breaking down in the normal range, there's no extra insulin circulating to drive you to a low. Theoretically, then, you couldn't go low if we get this to work properly. And this is another really good example of what JDRF is able to do. And this is a really neat combinatorial chemistry, biochemistry reality, trying to figure out how to make something like this happen. Companies had dashed themselves on the rocks and sunk trying to figure these things out. And here comes a graduate student who came up with a way to possibly do this, and JDRF gave him some cash. And we also gave him a lot of advice about here's how you need to construct some of what you're doing, right? And here's the kind of data that's going to be most compelling to the pharmaceutical industry, but also to the FDA. Because this is also a super dangerous concept. Like, do you mind this is maybe you'd give yourself one shot a day, or maybe one shot for every couple of days, and this stuff would just be circulating in your bloodstream until you ate and needed it, and as your blood sugars went up, it would activate, and then it would go back down and turn off, right? Really cool stuff. But if something happens, and all of that polymer breaks, and all that insulin suddenly is released into your bloodstream, you'd be in a really scary place. So the safety side of this is not fully understood and needs to be fully understood. So this was a high-risk environment that JDRF was able to go in and selectively support some work that produced data that I'm then very happy to say attracted the interest of this company that you may have heard of called Merck, right? Pretty good sized. And what's really great is Merck knows a lot about how to drive the commercialization of really good promising technologies. And there's another reason why they're kind of interested in this, because while we're thinking about this for type 1, this potentially has application for type 2. Turns out most type 2s, many type 2s, ought to really be starting to use insulin, but because it's such a dangerous drug and type 2s don't have to pay attention in the same way that type 1s do, there's a lot of, the doctors are often afraid to put people on fast-acting insulin because they're afraid that they'll cause them a bad low, so they hold back longer than they probably should. But with this kind of insulin, they wouldn't be able to put themselves into a scary place, and therefore it'd be much safer to prescribe, right? So that's a giant market, as opposed to talking about 2 million possible patients. We're talking about 25 million plus patients. So really cool stuff. And when Merck stepped up, they committed $300+ million, 350 million, I have to check, but $300+ million to drive the commercialization of this work. That was money then that JDRF didn't have to raise to drive this forward, right? Plus JDRF got its original investment back so we could continue to pump money into other work in our research portfolio. None of this has gotten to human beings. In that translational pipeline, this is still in the preclinical environment, still being tested in animals, still being evaluated in the labs. JDRF wasn't happy with the fact that we only had one entrant in the race. Charlie Keenan and Peter will tell you that new therapeutics die all the time. Even when you reach phase 3 clinical trials, it's the last phase before you go into human, you're approved and you get to go commercialize your product. 50% of new therapies die. They fail in, for whatever reason, safety or efficacy in stage 3. You've spent a whole lot of money and years and years and years, and you still see a 50% failure rate. So JDRF wasn't very comfortable with the idea that we only had one horse in that race. So we actually created a prize environment. We had been really working hard to try to get people to come to this. and had a not really strong response. So we created a prize and kind of disseminated that broad and wide, and actually were successful in attracting a lot of new applicants that were from non-traditional fields that felt they had a way to do the same thing, only a little bit differently. And ultimately we awarded three prizes to the first phase, which was just an idea. Do you have an idea for how we might do this that's viable? Now we have to start driving that idea through that commercial, that translational pipeline that I was showing earlier. So again, very quickly, that's the idea of Smart Insulin. Any questions? One question.
My perception is still that Europe is not using sticks and rocks to do medicine yet. They seem to be commercializing pharmaceuticals much faster than the FDA can manage in this country. Why is that?
Incoming. Wow. So full disclosure, I once upon a time worked for the agency that includes the FDA. There is no perfect place to be if you're a regulator. Right? Nobody wants to be regulated. There's just no sweet spot, right? If you're taking too long, everybody yells at you. If you allow things to go through too easily, everybody yells at you because they say you're in the industry's back pocket. And if something gets through that then ends up having real issues, then you're accused of having endangered people's lives. So there is no perfect place for the regulatory environment to be. FDA is funded in part by the industry it regulates, and that there's not nearly as much cash going to the FDA as we might think there is. But fundamentally, the answer to that question is that the FDA actually does a surprising amount surprisingly well. And there's a lot, if you actually look at the approval rate of new diabetes drugs in the last couple of years, that rate has gone up very fast, and we see a lot of new therapeutics making their way through that pipeline at a much accelerated rate, and that's very much goes back to part of what we were talking about earlier about the advocacy part, where JDF has worked really hard to say to the FDA, you need to pay attention to diabetes, and you need to get things moving through here better. So the good news is that's happened, and that is actually going on. So sometimes perception and reality are a little bit different. But the Europeans also have a different regulatory environment for certain things. So devices are somewhat easier to move forward, whereas the US environment is seen as being better for moving some of the compounds. So the good news is JDF is able to work across the global platform. So we can really optimize and try to make sure that we're moving all these pieces the right way across all that platform. So I don't have a perfect answer for you about what we do to make FDA green light everything. They're doing the best that they can, and what they're doing is frankly critically important to us, because otherwise there'd be a lot of things being pushed at us that we would be dubious about with the safeties. So it's not perfect. It's a constant conversation going on. The good news is they're friends of ours, and while sometimes we camp out on their desks and jump up and down and are probably pretty obnoxious, they really like us and they listen to us, and we work with them regularly to keep moving all these things through the pipeline. All right, I'm going to jump on. Okay, one more. I should go forward or I should wait?
Well, I mean, on that pipeline, how do you work the economics of it? Like I was just following up on your question, I do some reporting on diabetes, and one of the things we find is that sometimes people will launch in Europe instead of the United States because of the economics of the insurance environment. And so how does JDRF, overcome that hurdle or circumvent that when it comes to economic versus a regulatory thing?
So JDRF is a remarkable organization that can do almost everything, able to jump over long, tall buildings with just a little bit of help, but we haven't yet figured out how to drive the global economic model. So we would love to. So the answer is, we can do our best to de-risk the environment so that VC and others are able to say, okay, this now looks like it has real legs, and jump to it. And actually, I would encourage you to talk to Charlie Keenan, because this is the piece that he really owns in particular. But we try to position ourselves there to de-risk that environment, to help incentivize the commercialization pathway. But ultimately, let me do this another way. So I asked earlier, how many people in this room are using continuous glucose sensing? But what I should have asked first is, how many people are type 1 diabetes, and then what percentage of us are actually using CGM? Right? That's a huge advance in the management of type 1 diabetes. And yet the vast majority of type 1s do not use the technology because they don't want another thing stuck on their body, or because they haven't looked at it, or because their doctors don't know enough to recommend it, right? Huge advance. So if you look at the type 1 market, it's between 2 and 3 million type 1s in this country, and only a couple 100,000 people are using CGM. So how do we then jump up and down on the CGM company and say, you should be developing the next generation product? And they're like, are you kidding? I just spent $60 million creating this one and only a couple 100,000 people are using it, right? How am I justifying that to my shareholders? The news is that JDRF then works hard to get the word out about what these technologies are, what these therapies are, so that people can be taking advantage of them. But we can't make the economic model something that it isn't. So either these things are viable and there's a money-making component to it that will be able to drive this, or there aren't. But we try to make them everything as green-lighted as it can be. The regulatory environment, the clinicians be aware of it, the users use it, and tie it into bigger systems that then get people so we can drive that economic signal back, right? That's the best that we can do. And that's very much what we do.